In this video, we're going to look at the Yahwist creation story. Remember, the Yahwist were royal scribes founded back in the time of King David. This school of royal scribes that King David established, though, continued through King Solomon and his sons and their successors right up to the time of the Babylonian Empire, Babylonian exile, and then went into exile in Babylon. So this is a continuous tradition, and by the time the exile had come, they were seen as preservers of the entire written tradition of their school. So notice now, by the time after a few hundred years, they're going back and they can check the old stories and the old written accounts and things like that. They're seen very much as preservers of their tradition. So let's look at the Yahwist creation story here. There's two major elements in the story, two major parts. The first one is largely contained in chapter 2, and that is the story of the creation and the Garden of Eden and humans. It's kind of the idyllic scene. It's when things are great. And then the second part of the story, which happens in chapter 3 of Genesis, is kind of where things went wrong. It's a story of human weakness, but also God's compassion and continued care for human beings despite what they did or did not do. The story was not created in a bubble. It draws on various Near Eastern myths, and it sets the stage for the particularly Israelite story of God's covenant with Abram and his descendants forever, and tells why we need this covenant so bad. So if we start off in Genesis 4 and 5, we find this barren earth. This would have been something that would have touched a nerve with the ancient Israelites because this was the biggest challenge in their life. How to get enough water to irrigate their fields, or to feed their flocks, or just to provide enough to drink for their families every day. It was an area that was susceptible to frequent drought, and many of the areas that the Israelite tribes came from were quite arid. Okay, so you start just with this barren earth, and then God causes a mist to rise up and water the earth. Now, this would have been nice. I mean, this would have been paradise for the ancient Israelites. Just the idea that there's water everywhere, just that you can breathe easy, kind of. I don't know if you've ever spent a long time in an arid region, but you do tend to dry out. And people who live in arid regions do tend to have some kind of way to deal with this. They do usually have some kind of steam rooms that they build or something like that to kind of rehydrate their body from the breath in. All right, so they have this nice scene now with this mist that covers the water, and then God forms the human being, right? He forms Adam, the human being, out of Adamah, right? Which means earth. So there's a little play on words there, and the Yahwist writer likes to do that. You might say, well, what's the big deal? The words sound the same. But play on words are for some reason convincing. Make people really think about things and think there must be something to them. We see this today when we just look at the roots of different words. I remember hearing someone say once in some kind of lecture or something, self-help video or something, I don't remember, I heard it, but they said, your responsibility is your ability to respond. And just clicked with me at the time. I said, wow, hey, look at that. Look how those words go together. And so this play on words was something that the Yahwist writers seem particularly fond of, and we'll see it a few more places throughout the Yahwist works. Okay, But you also, besides the little play on word, is you get a intimacy between humans and the earth. Humans are made from the earth. You'll see later in this creation story that humans are to care for the earth. So it's kind of almost like we're taking care of ourselves, right? It's not man versus nature here, right? It's man came from nature. It's probably something that is akin with our contemporary worldview, right? We see a similar scene in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where one of the gods forms human beings from clay. That Epic of Gilgamesh is a Mesopotamian myth. Okay, then God breathes life into the human's nostrils. He breathes his life, his breath, right into him, and the human becomes a living being. Right? Again, there's a scene like this in the Enuma Elish. The Yahwist writers aren't inventing the wheel. No, they're using a lot of different sources. Some of them from Canaanite traditions, which again, remember with the Canaanite stuff, a lot of the Israelites used to be Canaanites, right? And then you also have traditions of these great civilizations like the Sumerians and the Mesopotamians. Anyway, now you have Adam, right? The human, a living being, and God's going to plant a nice garden with beautiful and nourishing plants all over. And also the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So at that point, there's a little break in the story, and we're told about the rivers, the four great rivers. Now, all the four rivers are said to be from the one source, the river that God causes to flow out of Eden. So what they're saying here is that all this water, which is life for the people in the ancient world, is from God. So God is the source of the fertility and life in the world, right? And so this is also going to discourage Israelites from thinking that fertility comes from participation in Canaanite or Mesopotamian cults, right? A lot of these, we already saw a little bit in the Enuma Elish how the idea that the crops would grow based on the procreative acts of the gods, right? So there were things that people would try to do to induce the procreative activities of the gods, and then they thought that would make the crops grow. And you might say, well, that's really silly. But again, if let's say someone performs one of these cultic acts that are supposed to increase the procreative activity of the gods, and then that next year crops grow, hey, people say, look, it worked, right? We did it last year, we had crops. And we did last year. We had crops, and the other year, not that many people did it, and we didn't have that many crops. So, again, to the ancient mind, correlation would often seem cause. We are not beyond that ourselves. Don't fool yourself. You see that type of thing going on a lot with various medical treatments that we have today, or other health diets and things like that. People simply see a correlation. This person lost weight eating these foods. Okay, let's just eat all that food for a month. It might not have a very logical basis, but it's convincing enough, right? People just see the correlation and they go with it. All right. So this was a big challenge for the Yahwist writers. They really wanted to get people more into the Israelite religion, into the Israelite tradition, into worship of Yahweh, and they wanted to get them away from participating in these other local cults. So in verse 15 then in chapter 2, the human, Adam, is identified as the one who will work and keep the garden. So this is a nice image of what a human being is for, what a human being is about. He's not a slave like in the Enuma Elish. The gods didn't create the human being because they didn't want to do the work themselves, right? No, here's got this nice garden, and God created the garden, and now he's going to keep the garden. He's sharing in the life of God in that way. It makes sense that people that were inspired by this tradition, the priestly writers wrote that man was created in the image and likeness of God. It's the same idea. You can see it there, which makes sense. Since the priestly writers were using these Yahwist writings as inspiration for their Christian story.